Can everyone hear me all right? Yes? Okay. We are thrilled to welcome Captain Lindsey Jeffries Jones to Wayne County. Thank you, Captain Jeffries Jones, for joining us this evening. Wayne County Public Library received an American Rescue Plan Humanities grant from NC Humanities. Funding for this grant was provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the American Rescue Plan Act Economic Stabilization Plan. Before we get started, I'd like to provide you with a little bit of information about tonight's speaker. Captain Lindsey Jeffries Jones was born not too far up the road in Raleigh, North Carolina, and enlisted in the North Carolina Army National Guard at age 17 in the 11th grade. As an enlisted soldier, she worked as an aviation operations specialist. Lindsey joined the Army ROTC at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, go Heels, and was commissioned as a second lieutenant upon graduation in 2012. Lindsey earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology with a minor in military science. She attended flight school in Fort Rucker, Alabama, and graduated on October 31st, 2013. Upon returning to North Carolina, Lindsey became the first African-American female Black Hawk helicopter pilot in the North Carolina Army National Guard. After 7 years of flying the Black Hawk, and at the completion of her medevac command, Lindsey learned to fly the Lakota helicopter and is currently the commander of the Lakota unit. This 16-year military background has placed Lindsey in a unique position to counsel military couples and families. After earning her master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in 2018, she focused her attention on couples, both within and outside of the military, as a licensed clinical mental health counselor associate. With her company, Level Your Wings, LLC, Lindsey operates primarily with teletherapy sessions in order to reach as many clients as possible remotely. Lindsey will be launching her first book, yay, Level Your Wings, A Pilot's Guide to Healthy Relationships, in the spring of 2022, so keep a lookout for that. In this book, she compares the framework that pilots use to be effective in the helicopter with techniques that couples can use to become effective in a healthy relationship. Lindsey currently resides in Texas with her husband, Darnell Jones, who also serves as an active duty engineer commander. And without further ado, I will introduce Captain Jones to the group. Thank you.
Hello. I think I'm going to stand over here. Is that going to be okay? I am really excited to be here, and that was a very warm welcome. I know we're going to start off with some Q&A, and Kelsey's going to get us started, and then I'll take it from there, and we will wrap up with some question and answer.
Perfect. So I'll mill around a little bit throughout the talk, but I'd like for you to talk a little bit about your experience getting started in the military, what inspired that journey, and some of the things that have surprised you about your career moving forward in it.
Okay. So getting started in the military, as Kelsey read that, I joined when I was 17 in 11th grade, which means I didn't really know much. So I am not yet a senior. I haven't quite figured out what I'm going to do with my life, but there were a certain amount of things that I did know. I knew I wanted to go to college. I knew I didn't want any debt, if at all possible. Encouraged by my mom, she said, if you can get as many grants and scholarships, go with that. You don't want any type of debt that you may incur trying to pay for college. And so I knew those things, and growing up, we struggled a lot. We moved a lot, my mom changed jobs a lot, and there was a struggle. So I knew that I wanted more than I was exposed to. My mom was like, you can go to college, and with the education, you can get a little bit more than what we have here. And a part of that, we had a social worker, and her name was Tracy Bryant. I will never forget it. And she was completely amazing for us. She helped us. She showed us that just because you're struggling doesn't mean something is wrong with you. You know, there are ways when you're offered the same resources that others are that you can still prevail. And I wanted to become a social worker. So those were the things that I knew in the beginning, my little 16, 17-year-old self. I'm like, I want to be a social worker like Tracy. I want to help families the way she helped our family, and I want to get it paid for. So that's where the Army comes in. And I was in Air Force Junior ROTC at Needham B Broughton High School, and that's in Raleigh. My mom went there, and she did Air Force ROTC as well. With that exposure, we had a recruiter to come every other Friday, and he would do physical training exercises with us. So in the Air Force, we wouldn't do too much, but when Sergeant Mack came, we were ready to go. We'd meet on the football field, and we would do those push-ups, sit-ups, and he's yelling at us, and we're feeling like we're in the Army, which was great because we really weren't, you know. So in the very beginning, he was his recruiter self and presented, this is what the National Guard can offer you. You can do it part-time. These are the benefits. We can pay for college. You can have these health benefits. You can do all these different things and still do whatever else you want. He did that in the very beginning. And every time he came, he never really pushed that. He just said, I did my speech, and now I'm here. And that made me feel very comfortable reaching out to him when I came to the conclusion that I wanted my college paid for. And so I reached out to him, and I said, Sergeant Mack, I want to join the National Guard because it's going to pay for my college. And he's like, okay, we can do this. And so I was 17 in the 11th grade. I called my mom, I think I had gotten home from school, and I'm like, Mom, I'm going to join the National Guard because they're going to pay for my college. And she's like, I was like, but you got to sign because I'm not 18 years old. So that was the caveat because I can't do it by myself. And she's like, well, you know, okay, I'll sign, and if it's a mistake, you'll learn from it. But like, she took the stance of, I'm not going to prevent you from going for something that you think you might like, and all you need me to do is sign. Like, this is your life. So I love that she gave me that confidence and that support from the beginning. And, you know, almost 17 years later, I'm still like, oh, I'm so glad my mom didn't hold me up or try to shelter me in that aspect. So that's how I got started with the National Guard. Unknown, like I had no idea what I was going to actually do. I just knew I was going to join the Army, get my college paid for. I knew I was going to be an officer because I said, I'm going to do ROTC. I got to tell some people what to do. I don't know what I'm going to tell them, but I got to be in charge at some level and tell them what to do. So I knew I was going to do Army ROTC in college. And UNC Chapel Hill, they have an amazing social work program. So my mom was like, well, if you can get in there undergrad, then you probably can get in their grad school for the social work program. So that's what set my sights. Like, these sprinkle little pieces of nuggets, not even I'm helping you from birth to figure out what you want to do. It's just little things. You want this paid for? All right, you want to do this? Go forward. You want to do that? Go forward. And so that gave me a clean slate to be able to go for what I desired and then let me blossom however the road was going to take me. So that's what got me introduced to the military. A roundabout way, not even because my mom or my dad or someone else was in the military. Literally, those small steps is what got me in the military.
And we have a rich history of women in military service here in Wayne County, North Carolina.
Yes.
So dating back to some experience in World Wars I and II. Sorry about that, guys. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experience as a woman in the military, particularly entering as a young woman, and what that was like and how your experience has changed a little throughout the years.
Okay. So entering as a woman into the military, I can remember my very first experience as enlisted. So I chose my job as an enlisted soldier based off of the duration of training it was going to take. I was like, okay. My Sergeant Mack, he said, so what job do you want? I said, what's a short time of training? Because I knew that I did 11th grade. After the summer of 11th grade, I did basic training. After basic training, I did 12th grade. Out of 12th grade, I wanted to do whatever my AIT was, and then in the fall, go to college. So I was like, give me something that fits with that. I don't know what that was going to be, but we found out that it was going to be an aviation operations specialist. It was 9 weeks. It was the same duration as my basic training. And I went to my very first drill, and I was terrified. And my sister, she was pregnant with my nephew, and they told her that she can stay after she dropped me off. And so she was like, oh, okay. So she's standing off to the side, and we're all about to form up in formation. And they're like, fall in. So I'm running to the back. Like, I need to go into the back in order to like follow along with what's already in place. And she's like, no, you get in the front and you better sound off. Like, my sister just influenced me so much in that small moment. You sound off when they call your name. And I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. So I get in the front, one of the first 2 rows, and then they're like, Private Jeffries. And I'm like, hey, Sergeant. And then Sergeant Mack's like, that's my recruit, and I was like, okay, this is a good thing. So that first exposure to training let me know immediately, like, it is a good thing to sound off, to be loud and be proud. And I didn't think of anything different because I was a female or the males weren't loud. I didn't have that. I just had that encouragement from my sister, and then the positive affirmation from my recruiter, and then everyone else kind of sounding a little louder after me. That let me know, okay, I need to set the example however I can. And so from that moment on, I became like the runner or the platoon leader, and I ultimately became the platoon guy. They called me the PG because I was there for 2 years while I was in high school before I could actually go to my real unit. So in that sense, me as a young female, 17 years old, coming into this National Guard training with people of many ages, even though we're all in the same category as just joining, they were able to look at me as a leader immediately. And they didn't treat me any different because I was a woman or because I was black, or they didn't push me somewhere because of what I looked like or the categories that I held. They put me in the front because I was loud and I was confident. And so I was like, okay, so that's what I need to do. So I didn't experience any challenges in that aspect of the differences between all the soldiers. It was more, you're going to stand out based off your leadership or the lack of leadership, or the ability for you to volunteer for everything. Those are the things that helped me stand out. And I took that with me to basic training. And then I was the platoon leader, the platoon guide there. And it was very interesting because we had 3 or 4 platoons, and they gave us different leadership exercises in the beginning. So we have to get this dummy, drag this dummy with this team of 7 people through the grass, all the way over there. We got to go over this obstacle. And I didn't understand what the reason for this was, but what it was to determine who was going to be the leader out of each group. Like, how do you maneuver? You don't know any of those people. You just got yelled at from getting off the bus. And now it's just like, all right, get this and all the gear all the way over there. And then we're like, well, who do I listen to? And they just walk away, and they're watching you and seeing who stands out to be the leader. Me, as my natural leader self coming in, I'm like, all right, you grab the head and then do this, put this on your back, put it to your ankle, we're gonna just drag it as we go. Like, I'm just telling them all these things, and they're just like listening to me. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm in charge, because you're showing me that you're comfortable following my lead, even if I mess up, and I'm guessing I'm exuding the confidence that's needed for you to feel comfortable to follow me. So in those instances, as a young female, the leadership came from within me, and the Army and whatever entity that I was around, whether it's a squad or a platoon, they all gravitated towards that, and they reinforced it. So that goes along with who I am and my personality. So as a young female, I stood out with my voice, I stood out with my confidence, I stood out with motivating others and making sure I'm taking care of everybody. I think that's my caring aspect of why I'm a therapist now. But those little things showed up throughout all of my early on trainings as a young female joining.
Thank you. Now, you mentioned particularly using your voice, being loud, being confident, embodying that space verbally and physically. You mentioned also how you've pivoted your military experience into your work as a counselor.
Yes.
Can you connect those two for us and
Yes.
speak a little on that?
Yes. So my desire, started from the social worker that we had as a child. But the more I got into my sociology and psychology class, I kind of was like, I think I like counseling a little more. So that was a desire, and I knew that as someone in the military and an officer, I would need a higher degree. That was my thought process. When you want to get promoted higher, the more education you have, the better you'll look, because you've already done your part on the civilian sector, and they'll still send you to more schools in the military. So I knew that I would have to get a master's degree. This is what I told myself. And after I finished flight school from Fort Rucker in 2013, I then was like, okay, I'm flying. Now I'm going to go and get a degree. Okay, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with my degree, and what will it be in? I know it's helping people, but that's so broad, so You can help people in so many ways. And so I'm trying to narrow it down. And the amazing thing was, at that time, I listened to, I don't know which message it was on the radio. It was satellite radio, but I was listening to something and it said, God will tell you, God will show you your purpose for your life only when he knows that you're going to glorify him with it. But until then, you can know your passion by doing whatever you want to do and not getting paid for it, but you still have that inner joy. You still feel fulfilled. And so I'm like, well, what could I do that I love doing without getting paid for? And that's my passion. And it turned out, at that time, I was counseling my friend who was military, or her husband was military. I was counseling them and a couple, just normal, hey, Lynn, this. And then he's like, yeah, but Lynn, this. So not just the woman, but the man is seeing me as an unbiased person that's grounded in God, that wants to keep them together, that's giving them a little advice. I was counseling my other friend and her fiance, and then my sister and her boyfriend. And so I'm just like, I'm going to be a therapist because I'm already doing it. Let me go get credentials so I can get paid to do it now. And so that's how I determined going from helping people, well, from social work to desiring to help people to actually desiring to help couples. Now from there, I finished counseling in 2018 at UNCG. And people were like, so what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to be a part-time therapist, part-time pilot. That's life. That's what I'm doing. I'm doing it both. I was like, that's why I'm in the National Guard, because I don't have to do it full-time. And I can have my own practice, and I can do that part-time. I can decide how many clients I want, and I can manage both. And if I'm getting burnt out on one, I can lean on the other. Getting burnt out, I can balance it, and they don't have to connect. But the way that I was able to connect the two was like my mindset after grad school. It started to shift when I started to line up the similarities with communication. And when we're in the cockpit, we have all of these communication things that we need to do. We have to do call and response when we're doing our checklist. We're doing the challenges, 2 challenge rules. So if someone says in the cockpit, hey, turn left, there is a tower. Hey, turn left, there's a tower. Hey, turn left, there's a tower. They don't have to keep telling me that. They can challenge it and they can take the controls. I have the controls. And they can do what's necessary. There are things that we have to do when we're working and we're communicating. We have to offer assistance. We have to direct assistance. We have to communicate timely and effectively and manage different workloads. I'm flying right now, so you're on the radios. All right, I'm gonna give you the controls. Well, I'm on the controls, I mean, you have the radios. So there's some things that we know because we've learned this in school, and there's some things that developed throughout the flight. And so then I started to think, oh, I want to counsel couples on communication, because this is usually a lot of the issues that I see are dealing with communicating. And so I started to draw the connections between those two. And then I started counseling after grad school, focused on couples, which was amazing. And then I remembered during an interview with UNC, WUNC, I think it was January of 2019 or January 2020. I think it was 2020. We started going into my history of who I am and why did I become who I am, and childhood stories, all to the background of a story they wanted to do on me, which then sparked me wanting to write about myself, which then reminded me that I wanted to write a book in the first place. And I was like, I forgot I wanted to write about communication. And then it said, I'm not going to just write about communication, because at this point I've been counseling for a year. I want to also write about all the other layers that show up in a relationship. And I want this book to not just be focused on communication, and that's one of my chapters, but also hit on everything else, such as mission planning. In a relationship, what's the mission? Where are we going? What's the goal? If you're just dating, you may need to know that that person just wants to date before you get in there, and you want to marry, you want to have kids, and they don't. Know where you're going, and that kind of aligns with the flight plan that we do. Are you going to fly visually? Are you going to fly through instruments? So a lot of the things that we do and that must be done in the cockpit is to help us have a safe and effective flight. And we do all these steps. We do pre-flight. We take all the chains out, make sure the fuel is there, check the engine. We're doing all these different checks. And it's like, we need to do that before we jump into a relationship. Do they have their chains released from their previous relationship? Do they have fuel or energy for a new person with kids or for a divorced person? Do you have your maintenance check? Is your mind ready? Are you ready to take on a new relationship? So similar to the pre-flights and the things that we do on a flight, and what we need to do to pre-flight a relationship. I draw all those parallels, and for me, that's how the two worlds collide, because I am a therapist and I see the two people in session from a bird's eye view, but then I'm also a pilot, and I know what it's like with me and my other pilot, and we're literally one of the birds and getting our own viewpoint. And I'm like, this is what we do, and this is where I am in this dynamic between the other pilot, but then this is what I see as a therapist, and I see if they allow the gravity of their actions to hold significant weight in their mind the way the gravity of our actions do as pilots, then maybe they won't give up on marriage so soon, or maybe they'll see that this is something they can work through. Because us in the Army, it's an unforgiving profession. You make a mistake, we could potentially die. In a relationship, you make a mistake, you start seeing those things, you don't want that marriage to die, so you want to use those same things that we use in the helicopter, so to speak, to keep you living, keep you going forward.
And we do have a question on a bit of your flight experience
Okay.
from our virtual audience, so let me
Okay.
get that for you.
Wonderful.
The question is, what sort of aircraft are you able to fly? What's the most memorable experience in the cockpit for you?
What sort of aircraft I'm able to fly?
Yes.
So I am, I guess it's 3 now. The very first aircraft that I flew was a TH-67. That was a little single engine, little bitty bird that the first thing they let us fly was that in flight school. And then we did fly the OH-58, which was very similar, but that was a Kyle Warrior. But those were more in the training of learning how to fly. And then once I left flight school, Black Hawk, I flew that one for 7 years, and then now I've been flying the Lakota, so that's my new frame. And the most memorable experience in the cockpit, I would say it would be my first flight, my very first flight in flight school, learning how to hover. That is very memorable. I have all these other moments where we may have been like getting some downdrafts and everyone is just kind of nervous in the aircraft because the turbulence is going. Those are memorable too, but when I think about my very first time learning how to hover, that's very memorable. And you have 3 sets of controls. You have the pedals, that's going to dictate where the nose of the helicopter is going to go. Then you have the collective that's going to dictate how much power, how much is going to be needed to elevate and come back down. And then you have the cyclic, which is going to direct the aircraft, let it climb and descend. And my pilot was sitting next to me, and my other student pilot was in the back, and he's sitting there, and he says, in fact, I'm going to show you what happened, because it was very, very interesting. So we're sitting in the chair, well, he's sitting over in the, I think he was sitting in the left seat, and I'm sitting in the right seat. So we're sitting there, he's like, pick up the 2 controls, or 3 controls, he's like, see, just like this, just barely touch it. And he has his finger on the tip of the cyclic, and he's like, just like that. Just barely touch the collective, barely touch the pedals, pressure, counter pressure, pressure, counter pressure. And I'm like, okay. He gives it to me, and I'm like, yeah, just like that. Next thing you know, we start a pendulum, and we start circling, and now we're like going up and down and left and right. And I'm like, I'm scared. I'm like, are you not scared? Because you're in here with me. And then the tower calls, and he's like, Charlie 47, are you okay over there? You know, because they're seeing us do this. And he's like, yeah, we're doing well. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is well. What is bad? Because I'm about to lose it. And so he said, okay, I just wanted you to feel what it would be like for everything to be in your control at the same time. Then he goes, okay, he was going to take control of the cyclic and of the collective, and he was going to just give me the pedals. And so both sides of the helicopter have the same exact controls. So if I push the right pedal, his pedal would move as well. So he puts his feet on the ground and says, you have the pedals. So I put my feet on the pedals, and he's like, just keep the nose facing this direction. And so I'm trying to, and then I just don't do anything. Then it starts to turn. And so it starts to turn, so then I push on the pedal, and then it turns this way. I push on the pedal, and then it turns this way. So now we're doing this. And he's like, so he's handling everything else just well, and it's just turning like this. And I'm like, he said, okay, pressure, counter pressure, anticipate the turn. So now I'm trying to anticipate it, but I always catch it late, and then I overcorrect. So this is what this experience was like, very memorable. Then I finally kind of get it a little bit, and then he says, okay, I'm going to give you the collective and just keep the altitude at this. Keep us at 10 feet. keep us right here. And so we're just sitting there. He has now the pedals. Oh no, I still have the pedals, so I'm still trying to focus the head. And now I'm trying to keep the altitude, so I'm doing this right here. And this is me, and I'm just like pushing it. Everything is overcorrecting. He's like, I wasn't moving it that way. Why are you? I was like, because it's moving. I'm trying to catch it. Like it was very insane. Honestly, this was very insane. I've never flown before, and you're giving me all these controls. But he is completely confident that I'm going to learn and that we're not going to die, because he is also in this aircraft and he doesn't want to die either. So once I finally get that at least to only drift up and down for maybe 4 to 5 feet. Before it was 20 feet, we're up and down very quickly. And he still has his hand down there guarding it so we didn't smack the ground. So he'll just like, every now and then I'll feel it push up. He's like, I'm not going to let you hurt me either, which gave me confidence in what we were doing. Then he finally gives me the cyclic, and he's like, just kind of focus the head. Make sure you keep the heading where it is. And he's like, don't worry about, like, don't try to get it to turn or left or right. Just kind of keep it all. So at the end of that flight, we were still in the pendulum, left and right, up and down, but at least it didn't start off like that. We kind of started that way, built our way back up. We still ended that way, but I will tell you, I did learn how to hover. It took me the longest time, and each flight, to put it in perspective, was about an hour and a half. It took me about, I think, maybe 10 to 11 hours to fly. So yes, it took me a couple of flights. My stick buddy, he got it very quickly. And they call him stick buddies because he's also on the sticks and he's my student pilot. But he got it very quickly, and I'm like, how did you do it? He's like, there's a hover button. And I'm like, oh, why didn't anyone tell me? I come in there, I'm looking for the hover button, and then my IP comes in, there's a hover button. And I'm like, oh, he got me. Like, I was sold that there was a button, and he was just messing with me. So I would say that I finally did learn how to hover, but that was definitely my most memorable, especially early on, flight experience.
I feel like there's probably a lot of parallels between that story and maintaining healthy relationships and working towards healthy relationships. So I do want to circle back to that.
Okay.
But you've given such a great illustration of your experience that it's gotten some good laughs from the audience. So I'd love to hear about a few more of your memorable experiences, because realistically, you're a part of North Carolina history and your stories are important to that narrative. So we'd love it if you'd share some with us.
Okay, I will. I'll share more stories. So I will say that I've had some nervous flights a few times, especially right out of flight school. This was probably 2013. I was a new lieutenant. I'm a captain now, and then I'll come up for my major in October of this year, so or November of this year. So hopefully promotion will be there, but I think I'll actually get promoted the next year after I finish my next assignment. But there were some memorable flights, and one that I will share is we were on our way back from the western part of North Carolina at night, and we were coming back to Salisbury. And we're under night vision goggles, and there are storms moving from left to right, as they usually do in North Carolina from the west to the east. And so we know that if we are behind the storm, if this is home and this is us, we know, or if there's storms here, then we're going to go towards the storm, because we know if the storm gets bad, we can just turn around. There's nothing between us and home. Or if we know that we are behind the storm when we take off, that storm will have passed by, and then there's still nothing between us and home. So at this point, the storm kind of stalled over where we needed to go. So we're out here in the western part of the state. Home is here, and then there's a storm, and the tip of it is like right where we need to go, but it's moving down. It's not moving completely to the east. It's moving towards the southeast. So we're watching it as we're over here. We're just keeping our eye on weather. We know we're going to be over here for another hour, and then we'll head back. So we just keep checking in a little bit more, checking in to see how fast it's moving, and determine that, you know what, we need to go ahead and start heading back, because we're going to either have to land and get refuel, or we need to already be in the vicinity. If nothing else, we can just land at the airport close to home. At least we're closer, and we can just pop up, hop over, and land, versus trying to get stuck out here. So we're flying, and some of the tips of this was This was probably a thunderstorm that dissipated, that's no longer having the lightning, but it's still going to have the up and down draft. This is right in that period. So right towards the end of those clouds, you're getting a lot of those up and down drafts. So we're like, okay, here's home, here we are. We're going to circle to the north and then come back down and then enter into our landing pad from the north instead of coming straight from the west because we needed it to go to the south. So we circle all the way to the north and we start making our way back down. At this moment, we're now realizing that a lot of those up and down drafts has reached, 15, 18 miles away from where their storm is, and we're feeling it. So we're flying, and then we're right around 5,000 to 6,000 feet. We usually fly at 1,500 feet, but at the time we came on up, we're at 5,000 to 6,000 feet. Next thing you know, we drop 2,000 feet like that. That downdraft is just gonna, we're in that column of air that's going up and down, and it pushes us. And so I don't think I was on the controls at that time. I think my other pilot was on the controls, and I was just in the left seat. And then he was in the right seat, and he was flying. And so we're kind of quiet. We're all quiet right now because we're like, this isn't the time to do a lot of unnecessary talking. We need to maneuver the aircraft, and we need to make sure we're up on our radio calls and our radio channels, and we're good. Outside of that, we need to do what we need to do to maneuver around. So we feel it, and I'm like, oh, my stomach goes up. And then as we're dropping down, and the crew chief in the back, he's like, I know when we talked about it later, he was like, oh yeah, when you heard that, that was me going, huh. And I was like, that's what that noise was? So we're talking about it after the fact, but in the moment, quiet. We circle around the storm, and then we get ready to land. I do the radio calls. We're doing everything that we need to do in order to land. Once we get over the fence and actually touch our wheels down, then we, oh, how was that? Did you feel that? We're talking about this. It's not something that we necessarily wanted to talk about when we were actually flying because we didn't want to miss something else because we're responding to what's happening. So we do that. We're talking about, he's like, oh yeah, I think some of those updrafts got us beforehand, that reached further than we anticipated. So we land, we roll on over, we stop. But I'm like, oh, I'm going to remember that feeling. And no matter how far we thought we needed to be away, 18 miles away from where that dissipating storm was, that up and down draft still caught us. And luckily, we were already at altitude. We were already high enough so that 2,000 feet that we dropped to 3,000, that's still higher than we normally fly on a regular day. Usually a regular day, we're at 1,500, and we're just kind of cruising around the trees. We were up at altitude. So we were definitely grateful for that. And I think that was part of his brief to me. We're going to climb up at altitude in the event, we need to deviate or do anything. We already have the altitude. We've up well above all the obstacles. So that was definitely another memorable event. Definitely, I felt it in my gut, and I'm able to talk about it today because it's very memorable.
Are there any memorable experiences that aren't terrifying?
Right. It's usually the ones that are terrifying that are memorable. The other ones that are memorable are more impactful. Like when I do a lot of talks to like the Civil Air Patrol, or when I do lunch and learns with high schools or middle schools, when I go and speak at Black History events. Those are always memorable. They're not in the helicopter. Well, some of them are whenever we do rides with the Civil Air Patrol. I actually got a message from one of the soldiers one of the airmen that was a passenger a couple of years ago. He found me on TikTok. He's like, you don't remember me, but you were my pilot. And I was like, I have that picture of you. I remember us taking a picture, and I found the picture and I posted it to him. He's like, you do remember, but he's like, he's now joining, I don't remember if he said he's joining the Army or the Air Force, but he's now, I think it's probably the Air Force, but he's like, I'm now joining and I'm gonna be trying to be a pilot. And I was like, wow. So those are the ones that are most memorable to me when it comes to empowerment and impactful encounters that I've had. Usually someone desiring to experience something they've never experienced before, and because they've been exposed to me, they decide to go for that. And so it always makes my heart smile, and I'm always like, I'm really glad that I do what I do, and that I come to talks like this, and I go when someone says, can you speak? Yes. Because if I'm I'm still the only Black female to fly for North Carolina. That was in 2013. It's now 2022, and there hasn't been another Black female to fly for the state. And I'm like, where y'all at, or just where, what's the difference? And I know a lot of it has to do with exposure. So I do my part and try to talk and meet people as much as I can.
what would you say to those women who think, well, I want to be like you, who might not yet be filling that gap, but are sort of waiting in the wings?
I would tell them to a couple of things. One, reach out to me. There are a lot of institutes that can help you get there, especially if you want to just get your pilot's license on the civilian side, or if you want to join the military, like the Avion Institute. I did a talk with them about 2 weeks ago for Black History. It was Black Aviation Excellence, and it had me from the military, and it had someone from Boeing, and someone from the FAA, and someone. There were just a lot of people in the aviation field. We had mechanics, engineers. There were so many people in the aviation field that said, even if you don't want to fly, you can still, whatever you desire to do, it's in the aviation, marketing, social media, public speaking, all of that, they all need that in the aviation field. So like, reach out. I would say to get connected with any of those institutes, and then also reach out to people that are already doing it. If you find someone that looks like you or that you can resonate with, reach out to them. I guarantee they're going to want to share with you their journey so that you can be inspired to take your own journey.
Thank you. That really speaks to the importance of sharing our stories and how sharing the stories from our past can bring us into a more vibrant future.
Yes, definitely.
So, I'd love to take some time to have questions from the audience interspersed with some questions that we have from myself and others.
Okay.
So since this is a conversation, I'd like to get the conversation started.
Awesome.
Do we have anyone who would like to go first? All right. If you'll just take a moment to.
Well, my name's Patty Pifer, and I'm honored to have you here on our campus today.
Thank you.
To share your story of success, and want to thank you for your service to our great nation.
Thank you.
That is very important, people that wear the uniform. But, you know, if there is one piece of advice you'd give a young person, especially a young female, who is wondering what to do with her life and is maybe, you know, not ready to step out for college or doesn't have the means to go to college, what is that one piece of advice you would give that young person?
The one piece of advice that I would give a young person, unsure of what they want to do, I would ask them, what is their wildest dream? What is their wildest dream that they would love to do? If this was a perfect world, what is that? Because once we know what they think their wildest dream is, then we can work back from there and figure out where can we start, who do we get you connected with, or what's similar to that, or why is that your wildest dream? As a therapist, I would want to know why. Because when they say, it's to have my own business, and I would want to know why. Why? Because I don't want to listen to anyone. Okay, so that maybe we're talking about authority. So in entrepreneurship may be that. Or maybe they want their own money, or maybe they want to run something differently than the way they experience it. So now they're dealing with advocating and change. So I would want to get to what their core values are and help them get to where they want to go. Help them shape really what do they want. But I would start first with what's your wildest dream that you would love to do if there was no restraint.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I guess begs the question, what was your wildest dream when you were younger, and how does that intersect with what you're doing now?
So honestly enough, my wildest dream was helping people, and I'm doing it. But I'm doing it on multiple avenues. I'm helping people as a leader in the military, and I'm mentoring young soldiers, and I'm a leader, so I'm my young lieutenants, I'm making them into better officers. And then as a National Guardsman, when we have hurricane relief, we have Hurricane Floyd and Florence and all the other hurricanes that have come through, I'm down there on the ground. The last hurricanes, I haven't been in the air. I've been more letting all of my other pilots go in the air. And now I'm the liaison between the ground personnel, so they have an aviation perspective. Hey, can they move that? Tell all 20 to get on there. We can't fit 20 people in there. Hold on, and how much stuff they got? They got a dog? You know, so I will then help them figure out what's the best package that we can help them. So so that's the way I show up, and that's how I serve and help people. And then also as a therapist, I help couples. And I think it's some of the reasons why I lean towards couples too was because a lot of my individual sessions that I did when I was in grad school and my internship, a lot of that had to do with people talking about someone else in their life. Their mom, their dad, their significant other, their kids. There was always someone else. So I said, well, if I go for couples, or family counseling, that'll bring everyone in, and then we can maneuver and smooth all the edges of where the problems are. Because we can work on you all day, but if we haven't worked on the other partner, you'll just go back into that toxic family or the toxic environment. You're not able to get the well-rounded help you need.
Absolutely. Now, because I'm a historian and we have a few other historians here, and
Okay.
hurricanes have been something that have impacted our community particularly, can you speak a little bit about your experience with hurricane relief and some of the work that you did and things that you saw families maybe experience or take away in terms of maybe trauma with those incidences and your response as a therapist to that?
Yes. So I'll break that into two parts. When hurricane season comes, it just depends on how the National Guard wants to react. In the last few hurricanes, I think it was Floyd and what was the other one? No, it wasn't Floyd. I'm trying to think about the two that I was involved with, but they're slipping my. All of them are mushing together right now. But it was in the last 4 years. There were two of them back to back that I came in and helped. The one I worked in Raleigh, like co-aligned with the Department of Safety, Public Safety, and they would get 911 calls. From that moment, that 911 is going to determine, is this an air asset that's needed or is this a ground asset? If it was an air asset, they would send it over to the air part, and that's where the air boss came in, and I worked directly for the air boss. And in our state, the air boss is a military. It's where in other states, it could be the actual Department of Public Safety person. But in our state, it's military. And this military air boss is in charge of all the other aviation assets as far as approving them to fly and approving them to do different things. So it may be Duke Energy, it may be the Air Force, maybe the Army, whatever's in the air. During this hurricane, this person has to be aware of it because they're doing search and rescue operations. So they'll need to send the 911 call. They may need to send the air support request, and that person may say, okay, it's going to be this. We're taking someone from this hospital over here to this one, and we need all the Medtronics to come along with it. So I worked more in that field of determining, is this air asset or is this ground? And if it's air, who do we give it to? Let's send it to the Coast Guard because they're already over there on the coast. This one is more inland. Let's send it to the National Guard because they're based here. Okay, it's over here. Send it to active duty. Send it to the Marine. That's what I would do. I would help determine where it would go. There's a lot of logistics in that too because they also cost different amounts of money depending on the resources you use. We work directly with FEMA. We work directly with other federal agencies that help assist us. So that's what my exposure to hurricane relief and search and rescue operations looked like. I wasn't in the air and saving individuals that way. I was more sending my pilots forward to do that.
And now this next question from an online audience may or may not dovetail into that experience.
Okay.
So I'll have you take it where you will. Was there any point when you doubted yourself or your path and had to push through? If so, what kept you going? What would you say to someone who's doubting themselves or their dreams?
Yes, so I did have something that made me doubt myself. So when you are a pilot, you are, when you first get out of flight school, you're going to fly as much as possible. Fly, 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 that's what they're telling you. Fly, 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 get comfortable. But right when you get up in hours, you should be transitioning to become pilot in command. And pilot in command isn't different from any other pilot, but what it does is in the cockpit, someone has to have the final say. We both can't be fighting over the controls saying, no, we're going this way. No, we're going that way. No. You're going to know who PC is. Who is going to be the PC of the flight? And one could be older, could be younger, could be more experienced, it could be less experienced, doesn't matter. Whoever is designated PC, they have taken all the tests, been signed off, and been given those orders saying you are a pilot in command. And you can be a pilot in command and not acting as that. You're like, no, I'm just a pilot this time. He's going to be the pilot in command. So it's not something that you have to use or respond in that position every time you fly. It's there because it has to happen every flight, but it's not mandatory that you must be it every flight. And then you'll get evaluated by an instructor, and then the instructor will get evaluated by somebody else. Or there's two instructors. One is going to evaluate that one, and then the other one's going to come out from the back seat, and then it's going to evaluate that one. So you just never know what it could look like. And so the time that I doubted myself was when I was at 500 hours, and I'm thinking, I should be pilot in command now. I haven't been pilot in command. Everyone's looking at me like she's the commander or she's the platoon leader. She's in charge of us, but she's not pilot in command. They're judging me on these things. So that was a real thing that I thought about. Like, you know, are they going to respect me if I am their leader and I can't fly with them because they're a PI, a pilot, and I'm a PI. So I can give you your evaluation, but I can't fly with you because one of us have to be a pilot in command. And so I said, well, I'm going to have to get over that. So let me tell you how I got over it. I said, I'm going to have to get over that because God didn't put me here just so that I can doubt myself and then no longer be someone that's an effective pilot because I'm not meeting someone else's standard. So I said, I'm meeting the standard, whether I get pilot in command or whether I don't, whatever circumstances it is, I'm operating where God wants me to be. So for me, I literally had to level my wings and take all the pressure off of myself and continue to push forward because I had to remember why I'm here. And how I got here wasn't intentional for me. You know, I just shared my story that I chose my job as an aviation operations specialist because of how long the training was. And then from there, when I got to college, they said, what are you going to branch? I thought I was going to be an officer as an aviation operations specialist. They're like, no, you got to choose another branch. I'm like, well, what branches are there? There's armor, there's adjutant, a general, there's chemical, there's logistics, there's aviation. I'm like, oh, let's stick with aviation because at least I know how to talk to the pilots on the radio and do their flight pay. They said, oh, this means you're going to be a pilot. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll be a pilot then. So for me, I didn't choose to be a pilot. Everything lined up intentionally. So I can't now allow pressures and stresses that are happening in the moment to make me forget that I'm intentionally placed here. So that's how I level my wings, so to speak, how I ground myself and continue to push forward through any uncertainties and doubt.
Right. Another question from our audience.
Captain, I'm Jeff. I met you out in the lobby a minute ago. First of all, not anything serious like the story you gave, but it reminded me of that time of silence when you said you were a little worried about what was going to happen. I was flying with my brother-in-law, or my brother-in-law was flying, and I was with him. Hit a wind shear, and the plane started doing some interesting stuff, and he looked right at me and said, this would be a good time for you to quit talking. And I quit talking.
Oh, yeah.
And we landed, and he said, man, if I'd have known it was that easy to get you to shut up, I'd have used that line a long time ago.
That's real, though.
Yeah, oh, that was real.
It's just like quiet.
Yeah, I mean, his eyes, I could tell it was time to be quiet. Mm-hmm. I'm very impressed with you, and thank you for being here. And just, you know, even though it seems like maybe God led you in certain directions, you were prepared for it.
Yes.
And you were willing to do what was necessary. I'm proud. I've got 2 daughters, and they're really good gals and strong, independent women. And one of them sent me this quote, and I just thought I'd get your take on it.
Okay.
Being International Women's Day today. That since day one, she's already had everything she needs within herself. It's the world that convinced her she did not. And that isn't always the case, but I know a lot of strong women, and there are a lot of strong women on this campus that maybe have had to, you know, overcome those obstacles of stereotypes or sexism or whatever. And you've really made it in a field where, you know, I imagine there was some of that.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to get you to get negative. I'm just saying, how were you able to focus and do what you needed to do?
So I love that quote, and what it made me think about when you said that, it made me think about how we learn right and wrong, how we are socialized and conditioned to know what's acceptable and what's not, or you have to learn when someone says, oh, no, don't do that, and you're like, okay, so don't do that anymore. You learn that, but what you do naturally comes from within. So that's what made me think about is the socialization of things and conditioning people to think you can't do this because you don't see anyone that looks like you that does it. And you're like, well, no one ever told me I couldn't do it. It was subliminal, because if I don't see someone doing it, then I may not think that we're supposed to do it, or maybe I'm not thinking that they allow it. So you start putting preconceived notions on why it looks that way, and it may be just because you haven't done it. You go do it, and no one told you you couldn't do it, and no one said this person and this entity isn't allowed to do it. It's just not there, and what you needed to see was someone to look like you to do it, and then that may motivate you to do it. So for me, North Carolina has been really great to me, and me moving to Texas after I got married, I knew, I'm like, oh no, I'm not changing National Guards. No, I've been in North Carolina for almost 17 years, and that in North Carolina National Guard for almost 17 years. So I definitely did not want to switch and have to relearn and figure out what that looks like somewhere else. I'm like, I'll just commute. It's very much worth it because my dad and my grandma, my brother, they all live in Raleigh, and my mom lives in Texas, so I'm actually get to see both parts of my family by me moving and living different places. And so for me, I look at that, my experience in North Carolina as very welcoming. I remember one of the pilots told me this. He's an old pilot. I don't say he's too old. He might see this and be like, "You're talking about me." But he was, from my experience, he was a very well-versed pilot, and he had been around for a really long time. And I was newly out of flight school, and we're sitting there at annual training, and he said, "You know what, Lieutenant Jeffries," I was Jeffries at the time, and he said, "You're going to be an awesome commander one day. I can see you telling everybody around here what to do. That's going to be you." And that was me. When I became the medevac commander, I was with those same people, and I was in charge of them just like he knew I would. But me being a commissioned officer, it leads me down that road to be the one that's going to be in charge. But hearing him speak that into me as a new lieutenant gave me confidence, like, you've been doing this forever, and you're telling me that I can do it. Oh, I know I could do it anyway, but thank you for telling me that. Like, that helped me, and I get that a lot. I've gotten that. I've been literally in the North Carolina National Guard for almost 17 years, and I get a lot of reinforcement and reassurance and just people looking out for me. They'll tell me stories like, "Yeah, I was waiting to see what he was going to say about you because he started talking about you. He didn't know I know you, so I was just waiting to see. I was going to get him." You know, I was like, "Oh, well, thank you for having my back." But he was like, he said great things, but I wasn't going to lead him in one direction or another. I was ready to have your back. And so I hear that a lot of people having my back. If someone doesn't know me or someone is just speaking of me and they're like, "She's been here for a while, so I know her," but they don't interrupt them. They let them say, and the majority of the time, it's always encouraging things, and it's things that's just like, yeah, you know, she's out there, she's doing this, and she's motivating people. You're welcome.
We do have a question from our online audience.
Okay.
What agency or agencies would you like to connect with to provide your services as a therapist?
As a therapist, definitely the Veteran Affairs. That one is they're going to be the ones that needs the most amount of counseling. I know the scheduling is drawn out, the wait list. So I definitely would love to connect with Veteran Affairs and veteran hospitals and military hospitals that are on different bases. So because I am a service member and I'm a spouse of a service member, I have that unique perspective of people within the military. So they may start complaining or verbalizing something dealing with acronyms. And I'm like, oh yeah. Now I'm not gonna know every acronym, but I will know a little bit more than the civilian culture, and I'll be able to, just them knowing that I am an officer in the military and I've deployed and those things, that makes them feel more comfortable to share more things with me. So a lot of times it's less about what I bring, but their knowledge of who I am and what they assume my experience makes them feel more comfortable. So any agencies dealing with military, I would love to be Army One Source, integrated behavioral health, any of those things that I would love to be involved with.
And now, I think we've got about 15 minutes left in our conversation. I want everyone from the audience to have a chance to participate.
Okay.
But I would like to circle back around to that earlier Cockpit story and the dynamics there and dynamics that we see in relationships, both as civilian spouses, military spouses, individuals coming back perhaps from military experience. What parallels do you draw on in your book and in your experience as a therapist that can really help us all, military and civilian, move forward in our relationships as the foundation of our life experience?
Yes, so I would say the concepts and the parallels that I would draw between military experience as well as relationships would be a couple of things. One, in the military, we need each other, no matter how intense or how high that ranking person is or low that ranking person is or how intense their job is or how relaxed their job is. We still need them to do that job. And if we take that realization that we need that person and put that into the marriage or to the relationship, that you need your parent, that you need your spouse, that you actually need them, I think understanding that it's not a bad thing to need someone. Now, we can get into codependency and all those different things in counseling sessions, but the idea that we're not a standalone creature. We weren't created to be alone. We weren't created to figure everything out by ourselves, but actually lean on each other for a support system. Understanding that as a foundation, that will be the first parallel. We do that heavily in the military. I need every one of my crew chief. I need every one of my pilots. I need every one of my mechanics, my operations, my fuelers. I need every single person, even though they may have nothing else to do all day except refuel. When we land, I'm counting on you at that one moment to do what you need to do, and you have checked the block. So I think if we frame it and we put it in the same foundation of we're all needed in order for us to survive and for the mission to be successful, every person has to play their part. I think that would be the very first, at the most basic parallel between the military organization and families.
I think that certainly applies to communities as well. So
Definitely.
very
communities.
important parallel here.
Definitely.
Do we have any other questions from our audience? I've certainly got more, but I want to give everyone a chance to talk. Of course.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You know, again, one of the things that was great hearing you say is, you know, you worked hard and you're one of a kind, actually. And you get out there and people see you and they go, wow, that's something I could do. And we've talked about it at community college of there are a lot of kids that just don't have any idea what they want to do. I mean, I could tell you I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was 17. Yeah. And so we want to get out there to the middle schools and the high schools and show them what opportunities are out here at this college. Like you learned from the military.
That's right.
That there's so many things. So your story is very compelling, and it kind of gives us something to think about when we're carrying our college message out to young people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's very important. For me, I think the one of the main points to take away would be you don't have to have it all figured out. You know, like that question about what would I tell someone who doesn't know? Dream big and start from there. Work your way back. What does the end look like? If you don't know what the end looks like, this is what I told someone the other day. If you don't know what the end looks like, if you don't know what your dream looks like, you may know how you want to feel. You may want to feel free. You may want to feel powerful. You may want to feel in control. There are some things that you know how you want to feel. You may not know what it looks like, but we can then do the same type of dynamic tracing and say, well, if you want to feel this way, people who feel this way usually have this job, or people who feel this way usually show up this way. They are in control because they have their own business. They feel free because they are a traveler and they are a contractor, or they don't have to deal with the schedule. So whatever you want to feel, that could also be another baseline to determining what you want to do. If you don't know what it looks like, you don't know what jobs you want to do, you don't know what's out there, how do you want to feel? They may say, I want to feel like I don't got to wake up early in the morning. I can just do what I want to do. And I make a lot of money. Okay, so let's figure out what that looks like. You know, like you don't know, but they may know how they want to feel, and then you can kind of see what's important to them right now. And then you can start picking through the logistics of that. Like, let's think about reality. You think you make a lot of money if you don't do nothing? You're like, well, maybe, because if I invest, or okay, so now we're talking about investing, you know, then we start talking about real estate. You might start talking about things, but then you're like, but in order for you to get there, you may have to learn this. So now this is the schooling that goes with that. It's all so you can get to that feeling that you don't got to wake up early in the morning, you know. So that's what I would lead people down when I'm doing career counseling. What do you want to feel? What's the big picture? What do you want to be? What do you want to see? Some of those things don't resonate. But usually you can tap into someone's feelings in the future.
And something you touched on there, what do you want to see, is sometimes, as you mentioned, dictated by what we've seen already and the representation that's available to us. And with that ties in the importance of sharing stories, sharing your story, sharing the stories of our veterans, and sharing the stories within our community. I thank you so much for being so open about your story. I know I have some experience doing oral histories with World War II veterans and others, and sometimes it's difficult to share those stories, or individuals hold their stories close to them until later in life. And as a therapist, that is also very important, sharing stories, sharing narratives. Can you speak on that a little bit as sort of a closing remark, the importance of sharing stories, both for the preservation of our past, but also the energizing and moving forward into our future so that we have a more representative, engaged, and together community.
Yes, that's a perfect way as a closing remark. I think that, and I wholeheartedly believe that everything that we experience, everything that we go through is for someone else. We hate the pain that we go through. We hate all the building blocks. But for me right now, standing here today, I wouldn't change anything that I did in my past. The pain, the ups, the bad, the good, all of those things, I did that happen for a reason. And now when I see someone struggling, I'm like, oh, I was the same way back then. You know, like I'm able to give them that story. I'm able to share that story. And when you're able to overcome those trials and you're able to persevere, those are the things that I see that's the most motivating to those people. Because when you get to that place where you can't see a good light at the end of the tunnel, you don't see a way out, you may feel like you're hopeless. Hopelessness leads to eventually suicide. You feel like there's not a way out. You feel like you can't release. You feel like you're forgotten about. You feel like you have no choice. You try to escape, and then you take your own life. So I always put it in the form of my story can help someone else in different trials. My story can show them that I failed the 4th grade. I always tell this, and none of my friends believe that I failed the 4th grade. I'm like, I did. And they're like, no, you didn't. You've been brainwashed. You haven't. You can't be as smart as you are. I was like, no, I was a little terrorizer kid when I was, and I feel that I was just wanting to have fun, and I was wanted to be the jokester in class until I failed that 4th grade, and I said, oh, so I guess I can't do that. And from then on, straight A's on everything, and that's how I led. And I'm like, if like my nephew failed a grade, and I said, listen, would you believe that your auntie failed a grade? No, you didn't. You're a pilot. You went to Carolina. You did. I still failed a grade, you know, and that doesn't define me, but it actually makes me relate to people who have failed things before, and then also see that you can still prevail and become something more. So I share that, and people are just like, nah, I don't think so. I'm like, because you're looking at me now. You're looking at the future product of what I went through. I don't look like what I went through because I continue to grow on that. And I think it's extremely important to share those stories so people can see you as relatable, see you as someone that, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. Have that motivation and that encouragement that they can get through whatever struggle they're going through, because we're going to all have those struggles. So I would highly recommend you share your struggles, you share your traumas if you're able to handle that. I know as a therapist, everybody can't share their traumas. They need a professional with that. But if something that you feel comfortable because you've overcome it and it doesn't have a hold on you, share that. And maybe someone else will take the pressure off themselves from having to hold that in, and they can actually confide in you.
Thank you. Do we have any further audience questions before you wrap up? Anything? Well, I'll leave you with this, because your story is important to the history of North Carolina, to women's history, your personal history. What's the most important and resonating part of your story that you would leave with our audience tonight?
The most important part of my story, it's so many important parts. So, you know, I'm thinking, I'm like, this. I would say the most important part of my entire story is my faith. Because when I didn't know how things were going to turn out, when I didn't know if I was going to get selected for flight school, when I didn't know if I have so many other testimonies of uncertainty, and I've learned to now become extremely excited when there's uncertainty. Like my husband will PCS in November of this year, so we're going to change where we're going to be living from Texas, hopefully, to North Carolina, South Carolina. So I'm excited for the unknown. I'm like, oh, wherever we go, it's going to be great, because everything else we've done has been just better and better and better. So I can't wait. So I have changed my perspective on what it is when you do not know. And my faith has helped me through all of the changes, all the uncertainties. And I think that is what I will leave with everyone listening and watching this online. When you don't know, don't look at that as a bad thing. Look at that as a faith-challenging thing. Grow your faith and push through, because you're not where you used to be, and you probably experienced a lot of bad things or some things that hurt your feelings in the past. So continue to grow through that. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much for your words tonight, your wisdom, and sharing your story.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank y'all all for joining us.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to come down here.